Howdy, and welcome to Group 4's presentation over misconceptions about the second language acquisition process. This was an article written by Klingler, Schoenweis, Onise, and Barletta, and will be presented by Erin Hanlon, April Harris, Amber Hill, Caitlin Ginzer, and Mariah Glazner. The first misconception that was covered in the article is that bilingualism means equal proficiency in both languages. It actually just means knowing two languages rather than one. The proficiency can vary. To define ELLs, or English language learners, is that they are speakers of a language other than English who are in the process of acquiring English proficiency. Moving down, bilingualism is a unique characteristic that includes students who are foreign-born as well as native to the United States. English language learners may vary in how proficient they are in their home language as well as in English. So language acquisition is dependent on the cultural and linguistic environments as well as the point in their lives that they arrive, either as newborns, at school age, or with immigrant parents. These are all factors that contribute to how proficient they are in both their home language and in English. There are two types of bilingualism. The first is simultaneous, and that is learning both languages early in life so that they're kind of equal. They're learned at an equal rate. The second is sequential, where they enter school only knowing one language and begin to learn English or their second language from school point on. The article talked about how language and knowledge are gained in different domains and different functions for each language. Homes and schools are rarely balanced environments. So at home, one student may be learning more in one language than they are in another, and the school could be completely opposite. For example, a student may know science terms better in English than Vietnamese because he or she has been taught in English in school but knows more everyday language in Vietnamese. So that will make the proficiency more diverse from one language to the next. The second misconception is that semilingualism is a valid concept and non-non classifications are useful categories. I first thought it would be helpful to define these terms. Semilingualism is defined as a type of bilingualism characterized by low-level ability in both languages, and sometimes you will also see this term referred to as limited bilingualism. A non-non is a term referring to the English language learner students that are classified as limited in both English and their native language. First, these labels evoke negative connotations about these students. In the article, researcher McSwan says that it is unnecessary and insufficient to characterize the language many ELLs bring to school as low-level and lacking for academic and social-political reasons. Another reason ELLs appear limited is that language assessments do not adequately measure the full range of students' linguistic skills. Language variation does exist and should not be viewed as differences in language ability. McSwan also says, if teachers believe that some students have low language ability in both languages, then this belief may have strong negative effect on their expectations for those children and the curricular content and teaching practices that students receive. So as teachers, there are a couple things that we can take from this to benefit our ELL students. First, we need to use more positive labels to classify bilingual students as potentially English proficient or linguistically and culturally diverse. Another important thing we need to be able to accurately measure and assess students' linguistic skills and language ability. Lastly, something else we can take from this is that we need to have positive beliefs in our students and have expectations that are reachable goals, making sure we aren't setting our students up to fail. So here we are at misconception 3, and it states that native language proficiency assessments that are commonly administered to ELLs to determine their native language proficiency present a clear picture of linguistic proficiency. These tests don't present that clear picture for a couple reasons. First of all, native language testing of English language learners is problematic because the test construction and validity of native language assessments used to justify semilingualism and non-labels are intended to assess one ability and tap into other skills, and that some of them use items to assess aspects of language that are specific to academic culture, and some are not related to language ability at all. That's why these tests are irrelevant sometimes and don't always give teachers a clear picture of how proficient they are in one or another language. In the article, researchers McSwan and his colleagues recommend abandoning the routine practice of testing minority students' oral native language, and that decisions of program placements and identification for language services should be done with home language surveys, brief parent interviews, and a second language assessment. And finally, to make sure that we avoid falsely identifying ELLs so that more good than harm is done for these students academically. We come to misconception 4, which is that literacy instructional frameworks that were developed for monolingual students are appropriate for developing bilinguals' literacy skills in their native or second language. First of all, primary and secondary level students develop bilingualism differently. Therefore, benchmarks differ for bilinguals compared to monolinguals and for younger students compared to older students. Although some of these English language learners have learned some principles of language that will transfer to English, they may not recognize it. It's our responsibility as teachers to explicitly teach those different principles, because these students may not realize that they can be equal from one language to another. And finally, the process to writing instruction is not always best for ELLs without specific modifications. Second language learners have different understandings of how to paraphrase, cite works, peer review, revise, understand the teacher's feedback, and know what sounds best overall. Again, we as teachers need to look individually at our English language learners and really help them and modify so that they can realize how to effectively do all of these tasks. So as I stated in the last slide, helpful things that we can do. We first have to find out what linguistic elements do not transfer from English so that they can modify instruction to meet those needs. We must target instruction to meet the needs of our students. We as teachers can be well informed about our students' native language and know how to assess how they learned literacy in the past. These will all help us to modify instruction for each individual student and give them the best chance at learning their language effectively. There's a study in the article, and it was called Escamilla's study, and what it was that students wrote one draft responding to a prompt for 30 minutes at the beginning and end of the school year. So 64 students wrote only in Spanish, and 46 wrote in both English and Spanish. At the end, teachers met to evaluate the writing samples independently and as a group, and afterwards they were interviewed by a researcher. And this is what they found. First of all, teachers believed that the student's language was a problem. Rather than looking at the student's strengths, the teachers focused on their students' weaknesses. And they attributed these weaknesses and writing problems in English to negative transfer, also called interference, from Spanish. Teachers were frustrated about their lack of opportunities to develop their own skills in teaching reading and writing in Spanish, as well as teaching emerging biliterate students. Although the writing prompts in English translated to the same words in Spanish, they were not equal. Due to requirements of the rubric, Spanish writings were more likely to have more errors.